Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session on how talent hiring is changing in 2026. My name is Tiffany eBay, and I lead content and revenue programs for the marketing team here at Handshake. Today, we will be walking through some of our findings from our recent 2026 Campus to Career Report, which focuses on how early talent hiring is evolving this spring and some best practices you can start to put into action right now. And then later on in the session, I will be joined by the wonderful Michelle Militante, who is the Senior Director of Global Early Talent Recruitment here at PepsiCo, and we will discuss how her team is adapting its early talent strategy to respond to some of these very real changes that we're seeing in the market. Michelle, would you like to briefly introduce yourself right now?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Militante. I do lead our global early talent recruiting here at PepsiCo. My background spans PepsiCo, IBM, and PwC previously. So I've spent most of my career focused on creating strategies to ensure we're focused on future skills, how to reduce friction in the hiring process, and really building more equitable pathways into early career roles. So I'm excited to be on the panel today.
Amazing. Thank you, Michelle. We can move to the next slide. All right. So when we started working on this year's report, one thing became really clear, and that was that early talent hiring is hitting a breaking point. So the first and probably the loudest driver of this is AI. We all know that we are now in this new AI economy where some entry-level roles are disappearing, others are being fundamentally overhauled, and new ones are emerging faster than job descriptions can keep up. So the skills needed for roles are also changing faster than most hiring criteria were ever designed to handle. Second, what it means to be qualified is also shifting. So with so many applications to sort through these days, also very much in large part due to AI, it's really becoming hard to decipher or predict which candidates can succeed in this new landscape. And then third, candidates are making decisions about employers much earlier on in their journey, often before they apply. So early talent is exploring careers, they're forming preferences, and they are building familiarity with employers even before they're on the radar of a hiring team. So when you put all of these things together, it becomes really clear that what worked well in the past with hiring just does not work as well today. And spring recruiting is really where many teams are starting to feel that disconnect. So as AI changes how work gets done, early talent is entering the workforce with a different set of skills than teams are used to hiring for. So for instance, over half of the class of 2026 reports using Gen AI tools at least weekly, and nearly three-quarters of employers say that entry-level candidates are more comfortable working with emerging technology, more so than senior employees. What this tells us is that early talent is often arriving with capabilities organizations are still trying to build internally. And as roles change faster than teams can often reskill, early career hires are bringing fluency and new tools. They're bringing faster learning curves and different ways of working into the organization. So that's why a growing share of employers are now saying that entry level hires are adding immediate value, not because they know everything, but because they are already operating in the environment that the work is moving toward. So when we talk about early talent in 2026, this isn't just about pipeline or future potential. It's also about how the work is changing and how skills are shifting and why the entire early talent hiring model needs to be rethought. So this is where the reinvention shows up in practice. So in our report, we break down the 5 shifts that you're already seeing leading teams put into practice this spring. So the first shift is all about reach, which is moving from employers having a visible brand only during the application process to having a greater presence earlier on when candidates are exploring. The second is qualification, which is moving from credentials to signals that reflect how the work actually gets done. Third is engagement, which is no longer about one-off outreach. It's about ongoing touch points that build familiarity and confidence in your brand over time. The fourth is efficiency, which is changing. So teams are spending less time on manual processes and using technology to really help them engage the right candidates. And then finally, our relationships, which are becoming longer term. So it's no longer just about a single job posting. It's about building and maintaining a relationship with talent over time. So I'm not going to unpack all 5 today, but instead I want to briefly focus on 2 that you can start thinking about the spring. And then we'll move into discussion with Michelle and see how it's working at Pepsi. Perfect. So the first shift is all about reach, but the real change is how candidates experience employers. So applications have become a lagging indicator. So by the time someone applies to your job, their impression of you is usually already set. What shapes that impression today isn't a single moment. It's actually a series of touch points over time. It's the content that they see, it's messages that they receive from you, it's events that they attend. And this all happens during exploration and not at the point of application. So reinventing reach means paying attention to those early moments and not just the point where candidates click apply. Next slide. Perfect. And what this means is that if you only show up at application, you're often too late to influence most of their considerations. So by then, candidates have already decided who they want to give their attention to. So the data shows that early engagement drives stronger downstream outcomes. So when candidates have seen an employer before through content, through conversations, exposure, they're much more likely to engage later. So the big takeaway here is that um, whether you showed up early enough to actually ensure the right candidates are interested in your brand, that will be most important moving forward. The next shift is all about qualification, and I know that this is really where a lot of teams are starting to feel the most tension right now, especially this spring. So what we're seeing isn't just that skills are changing; it's that the skills, it's the signals that teams rely on to identify readiness are no longer lining up with the work itself. So resumes, majors, GPA, those were often really useful shortcuts in the past, but in an AI-driven environment, they're becoming much less reliable indicators of who's actually ready to do the work. So from our vantage point here at Handshake across our entire network and through our partnerships with AI research, we can see roles evolving faster than hiring criteria. And the result is a widening gap between who looks qualified on paper and who's actually ready to succeed in the role. So as work changes, entry-level roles will require being more adaptable, being able to problem solve, and having comfort with emerging tools, which are all skills that don't always show up in traditional screens. What this means for employers is that the ways you assess quality has to change, especially this spring. So if you keep relying on things like GPA, major, or pedigree, especially for roles where they aren't necessarily critical, you will miss out on candidates who actually have the skills best suited for the role. So teams that are adjusting fastest are being explicit about the work and what really matters for the role, and they're using signals that reflect that instead of defaulting to the easiest things to screen for. All right. The moment you all have been waiting for. How do these shifts show up in practice at Pepsi? Michelle, so excited to have you here to bring some of this to life. We can just dive in. I have a ton of questions for you today that I know people are excited to dig into. The first thing I'd love to hear from you is, can you walk us through can you walk us through your overall strategy at PepsiCo? Would love to hear how your team's approach to early talent how your approach to early talent recruiting has evolved as application volume has skyrocketed and the roles themselves have changed this spring.
Yeah, it's a great question, Tiffany. It's something, what were we calling it last year? The application avalanche, right? So we hit an apex in the amount of candidates that would apply, AI in the market, everybody kind of starts looking the same. So we had to be super intentional. And what worked for us when we would get six-figure applications was to be super intentional about the time frame in which we post and take down. That really was a major differentiator for us, which coincided with our event schedule. So it aligns, right? The second thing we did was to ensure that everyone that actually did apply would get looked at. So we weren't losing because of the numbers of applications. So we hired additional resources, human eyeballs, to actually quality check past certain checks in the system to elevate the highest quality individuals for interviews. And that really made our accuracy much more focused.
That goes into the next question. I'd love to kind of dig into kind of how you identify quality talent, which is something that so many teams struggle with today. When you all think about quality, what looks different now compared to even a few years ago, and how do you kind of go about assessing those signals within candidates?
Yeah, there's so much to that question. You can unpack it at several layers. When you think about quality for us, we'd start out with the programs that we were targeting, right? So you start with the source. Then you're looking at, a few years ago, the downstream impacts of COVID. Soft skills were lacking, communication, comfort in professional settings, understanding workplace norms. Those were huge gaps that we were seeing. Now, with the market tightening up, I think it's proven a real positive for employers because candidates are coming like much more prepared. We're also doing things to educate them more about the jobs that we have. And what's tough, especially for us, is we are focused, a good majority of our roles are sales. So how do you quantify sales on a resume? If you're thinking GPA, majors is another one, but a lot of that stuff you kind of have to get to know somebody about. And that relationship focused recruitment strategy is where we're heading next, in addition to location strategy. Post-COVID, candidates were much more open to moving. So we would target certain schools, core schools. Everyone had core schools. You'd go there, you'd try and hire 70 to 100 people from a school and disperse them across the country. That has proven to be a really tough challenge. So we have shifted more towards local quality focus with those relationship skills.
What are strong early talent candidates doing now that they weren't doing before?
Meaning, meaning what? In terms of search or during the interview process?
During the interview process, like what are you seeing now that you may not have seen before?
Yeah, they
How
are
are they
coming
standing out?
in, they're studying. They're studying and they're practicing, right? It is much more apparent. And we have to put in some checks and balances with AI usage because if some of these things are done virtually, there is opportunity there that, are they leveraging AI during their interview process? We're trying to put in checks and balances. Does that mean back to all in-person recruitment and interviewing? We're not sure yet. It really depends on some of the numbers, which are also fluctuating given the market. So everything's got a scale no matter where we land. But these are the kinds of things we're thinking about as we're thinking about this next cohort of talent coming in and the skills they've picked up along the way.
Are there any new AI-enabled skills that you guys are seeing and assessing as well? I know you mentioned some soft skills before, but what are some of the new like AI skills that Pepsi is focusing on?
Yeah, well, that's a tough question. There's definitely roles that are leveraging AI more, and there, of course, are tech roles, right? But at PepsiCo, the percentage of tech that we're hiring is much smaller in comparison to supply chain and sales, which is really the majority. I would say that we're seeing just evidence of candidates being much more, they're not afraid to use it on absolutely everything and teaching my team to do this, teaching, I'm sure this is all over campuses, right? How they can be more efficient with their time. But then there's also all these legal questions of like, are we using it in the right way from an employer perspective as well as at schools, right? So I think AI, it's going to be a little while before everybody lands on like, this is the right way to use it and this is how we want it, unless it's specific to a particular job, right? But it's, if not everybody, if no one, if there's anyone out there that's not using it on a daily, weekly basis, you need to probably rethink about upskilling and how to get super comfortable with, using it beyond a Google search.
Got it. You mentioned core schools really briefly. I would love to hear kind of how those have changed over time. I know you also mentioned prioritizing some more schools that were more local, but I would love to kind of hear how you were prioritizing schools kind of before this application avalanche and how you're looking at them today.
Yeah, I would say I think PepsiCo's in a unique situation where, and I've had a lot of conversations about this because we hire for 400 different locations in the US alone, which makes logistics and intent super important. Because when you ask a student, where do you want to wind up 9 months from the time we actually speak with you, which is very possible given the runway, right? That can change the way life changes. So it's really difficult to just go to, say, a school in Texas, expect to hire 100 people and send them all over the country unless they've already got community there. So what we're really focusing on is location and where they're wanting to build community right from the start. A lot of people want to go home, wherever home is, or be at least closer to home, rather than thinking, well, I can get my leg in here and then go where I want to go. you should probably start out in that direction to begin with, because those are the people that get to know you, the relationships that you create at work, and you start to build your path already. Does that help answer your question? I'm sorry if I took a windy.
No, absolutely. I also think it kind of feeds into some of the other things that we were talking about, mainly around engaging early talent before they actually apply, which it sounds like you guys are already doing. Can you talk a little bit more about that, especially how you're thinking about it this spring recruiting cycle?
Yeah, well, because PepsiCo is a CPG brand that a lot of people are already very familiar with since they were little kids, right? We've got brands like Frito-Lay, Gatorade, Quaker, and Tropicana, which our applicants are also our consumers, which can be a double-edged sword. And with, like, why it's super important is that we want to make sure while they may be familiar with our brand, they may not be as familiar with us from an employment perspective. So how do we string that along in the journey and approach them at the right time? Sophomores, juniors, freshmen. I mean, high school, right? How are they going to think about working for us and being a part of what brought that product to life? So, spring is a great opportunity because we have filled the majority of hiring by then. So, how are we using those engagements? It's a retention strategy for the ones we've filled. And it's also thinking about the younger classmen and what we're doing to share with them the types of career opportunities that made the food they were eating earlier that day, right? So targeted virtual info sessions, early interest communities through our CXM. Alumni is something that it's hard to always track to alumni, but boy, are they passionate about trying to bring younger classmen through. So there's a few different ways, but it can't start early enough.
What happens if you kind of miss that early moment?
I mean, you're going to be catching up. So it's not that it can't happen. And, you'll see it between hiring full-time candidates versus that, like, cold, versus interns, double interns that you've kind of brought along the way. They're much more self-selecting in. They know what they're getting in for. What do you say? Recruit once, hire twice is the goal. But, we haven't done any sort of data analysis around it, but do your cold connects come senior year stay as long? Are they as productive and as not just productive, but perform at the level you expect when there's others that have been going through the motions here for years now and know exactly what to do to hit the ground running?
I'd love to kind of dig into some of these earlier candidates. Can you talk a little bit about their behavior and expectations and some of the new things that they're bringing into work that we may not have seen in the past?
Well, I think AI is proving itself. I mean, when they are joining the workforce with different generations who are probably less comfortable using AI, their efficiency, their speed. It's the speed that AI can take all this data and really spit out exactly what you need. You can ask some really complex questions, whether it's travel plans. Our people do need to travel quite a bit, and it's not
Mhm.
always to urban areas. Some of them are tougher to get through, or international. Like, how do we speed things up and make things ultimately easier? That's a big change. I would say that also the corporate norms are coming back, but it's different. It's different than what it used to be a few years ago. And I think not only are our candidates and then new hires adjusting, but our workforce is also having to adjust to these new generations as well. So there's a meeting in the middle overall.
Can you dig in a little bit there and like, how are some of the other folks at PepsiCo having to adjust as well? I guess what does it look like kind of bringing this new cohort versus the old guard?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're impressed with the talent that's coming in, which is fantastic. And they usually are, but this is different. The quick assessments, the muscle that an intern or a fresh grad can bring, and not only the speed, but the ability to pull in much broader insights to help bring muscle to projects that maybe are taking longer. I mean, there's constant transformation going on here at PepsiCo. It is in every part of the business, whether it's global transformation, whether it's within a function that spans across. There is so much data analysis that's going on to become more efficient, to reduce friction along the way. These are all things that AI can do better at, and people who are comfortable using it and know the right inputs to get the right answers are key. And I think they're teaching a lot of our workforce as well.
Those are great points to hit on. I know we often get the question, does early talent still matter? But it sounds like, especially at PepsiCo, it truly does. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk like, are the jobs going away? They're just shifting. They're just shifting. And granted, heavy tech, yes, you're probably going to see more flex there than, say, something that's physically based. I mean, at some point, product still needs to get on the shelves. Is everything going to be a robot in the future? I'm not sure, right? But it's hard to imagine a world where those jobs are shifting, and it's the folks that are agile enough to quickly learn and be open to those types of roles that are really going to stay ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. I know we've been talking about AI on the candidate side, but I would love to hear how Pepsi is, if at all, kind of using AI or technology throughout your workflow to kind of become more efficient. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, and it can never be efficient enough. I think what is consistently uncovered is that there is no perfect technology out there that's really been built to manage early talent recruitment. And it's a bit of like a Frankenstein. Like if you talk to anyone in the business, we use this and then it connects to this and then it does this, but there isn't like a suite of products that you can just turn on and it goes. So there's a lot that we are looking at from not only from an AI perspective, because again, there's a lot of legal behind that and how it's done. But anywhere we can reduce that friction, whether it is with our assessments, whether it is with basic qualifications and how things are coming in, anything to reduce the opportunity for creating work versus getting really laser focused on let's just only look at the people we actually want to hire. If we can get there, wow, that'll be just much more streamlined and efficient than trying to work through all of the extraneous.
Would love to pivot a little bit into kind of like spring because it's here now. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the priorities that your team has, especially this spring?
Yeah, yeah, it is one, there are definitely efforts going on campus or outreach to candidates. So retention is big. We know it's a competitive market, and there is quite some runway still to the time that they start. So how do we keep them engaged? How do we leverage our intern ambassadors to help with this as well? Inform that community early on while on campus so that they're kind of, already building this cohort upon joining. That's a big one. How we're reaching out to younger classmen, of course, absolutely. But we're also taking a reflective look on transforming our function as we are going through global transformation in the early talent space already. So we're kind of parallel processing, focusing on keeping the talent that we've already recruited, finding the ones that were harder to fill, and a lot of that ties to location. But then also, how do we reinvest in the function itself to look at our technologies, to think about how do we globally integrate across the world to streamline our systems. We discovered there were 85 different programs run globally with the goal of hiring early talent. Well, how do you unpack that and why are there 85? Should there really be like 10? Should there be like 5? I'm not sure, but 85 feels like a lot. And it feels, if anyone knows a supply chain, it should be a manufacturing organization. And you want to reduce the level of customization if you're going to reduce that friction and time to hire, right? Which in the end is something we're all focused on because Speed is everything, but accuracy is also very important. So we're reinvesting in our function.
To that point, how do you balance speed and confidence, especially when you're hiring so many people at scale, and especially during such a busy season?
Yeah. I mean, you got to make sure your teams are appropriately dispersed. So making sure we're not overworking one side of the house when another is just got a little luxury of time. We want to make sure that the right skills, and I don't want people having to learn to apply. I mean, on the team, let's say, learn to apply the knowledge that they've learned to create the solution. Let's have the experts already focusing on the right solutions that they can bring to the table. So managing your workforce, managing your technology is number one.
Um, Kind of zooming out, because I know we have covered so much ground. If you were to pick just one shift that has mattered the most for PepsiCo and your early talent strategy, what would that one shift be and why?
Yeah, I think, especially in certain markets, volume was like a positive. Oh my gosh, our social reached this many, people, applicants. It's really highlighting our employer brand. Well, that's great. But I think moving much more to an intentional, focused sourcing effort skinnies up the amount of overall effort that's put out there, right? And I don't think there's any team out there that has a lot of extra effort to just give away. So, how do we make sure we take that effort and really harness it for what we're trying to do? Means intent on the sourcing to start. If you don't start there, then everything else is going to be bigger than it needs to be too. So that would be our biggest approach. So the timed postings up and down, the programs that we're focusing on, the relationships that could already be working those candidates and those hires in the end. Thinking about how we get laser focused on the skills that we're looking for has been a big shift.
What is one piece of advice you'd give another employer kind of wrestling with some of these same changes?
Yeah, I think you got to get really the number one question to ask any business or any stakeholder is like, I want this, I want this, I want this. It's constantly I want. I want an intern. Why? Why? What is your goal? What do you really want in the end? And getting super clear about that before you spend any additional time building things that don't really provide the value in the end, equaling the goal, it's a waste of time. So getting clear about goals and why is really going to be important. And it's a conversation that I'm having daily, especially as we're speaking with people who are new to early talent or don't necessarily understand the cycles and the importance of schools and programs and things. So it depends where you are in the maturation cycle of like how much do you know about early talent from a stakeholder perspective, but getting clear on the why can save you a lot of time.
Absolutely. Any final words for the rest of listeners today?
I do think early talent is on like the precipitous of a lot of change. I mean, we've seen it coming, right? It's kind of like gone up and now we're kind of watching the effects of AI and the volume shift and the market right now. So it's going to be a super interesting time. Getting really clear about what you're doing is going to be even more important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for Michelle for your incredible insights. You really helped kind of bring some of the themes that we saw in the report to life. So we really thank you so much for your time and being here today. For the rest of the group, if today raised more questions about how your own early talent strategy is evolving, the 2026 Campus to Career Report is a really great way to pressure test assumptions and see how leading teams like PepsiCo are already adapting. The insights you heard today come straight from the report, and it is now live, so you can go check that out right now. Also, please take a moment to complete our brief survey, which will be popping up here in just a minute. And also be sure to join us next week on Tuesday, February 3rd for the second and final event in our spring recruiting series. If you registered for today's session, you're already signed up, so there's nothing else you need to do. Next week, you will hear from Macy's TA team, plus a panel of really great undergraduate and graduate students who are sharing real, unfiltered experiences with their job search to help you better connect with early talent at every stage this spring. So thank you all so much for joining. Thank you again, Michelle, and we will see you soon.